Welcome to Keep IT Healthy podcast, a show hosted by people making things happen in technology, aiming to optimize healthcare delivery, health, well-being, and fitness. My name is Jan Kamiński and I'm the co-founder of AppLover, a company dedicated to improving the quality of life with IT solutions and digital advisory. We started making this podcast to amplify great thinking to propel healthcare forward. Our guest today is Erin Carson, head coach of ECFIT.
Hi. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. We always start in this series of podcasts. We always start with the backstory and what brought you to this career path.
I think the most important thing to recognize is that I've always been an athlete and a competitor. I grew up as an athlete. I recognized very young that I had some gifts. And I think healthy competition just intrigued me like crazy. And I truly enjoy winning. And then as I got older, winning took on a little bit of a different meaning. But through my really competitive younger years, I had the opportunity to work as an assistant basketball coach at a very fine university here in the United States, the University of Nebraska. And I think what set them apart, I'm an alumni of the University of Colorado. So it's very odd here in the US for me to be a little bit of a fan of the University of Nebraska because we're quite rivals. But the most important thing about, and what really set the University of Nebraska apart, was that they had an incredible strength and conditioning program under the leadership of a man named Boyd Epley. And Coach Epley actually went on to start the National Strength and Conditioning Association here in the US and became the credential and provides the credential of distinction as a strength coach. And I hold and have held that credential for over 30 years. So seeing the University of Nebraska dominate college football in the United States in itself is impressive, but also to be able to have experience and understanding of the backstory of their success. They were the first university in the United States to have just an exceptional strength training area and to truly highlight the development of athletes using strength and using motion and building bigger, stronger, faster athletes. And so having firsthand experience with Coach Epley and being able to see the importance of that in athletic development and excellence and championships was really gave me my drive to really pursue that aspect of athlete development. I have massive respect for sport-specific coaches, whether it's swim, bike, run, or football or basketball. But I think coaching is coaching, your ability to lead and give guidance to athletes in different areas. And so I chose to go the athletic development through strength and conditioning as opposed to sports specificity. But it served me very, very well, and I'm super thankful for that.
What led you to transition from a successful basketball career and to become a strength coach? Because I know sport is sport in a sense, but these two areas seem slightly, or not even slightly, but just different.
Well, first and foremost, proximity to exceptional endurance athletes probably was one of um, my biggest opportunities, I guess. I live in Boulder, Colorado. It for many years has been known as the Mecca of endurance training. Really around the world. I mean, many international athletes also come to Boulder to train. And I got to witness what they actually did in the gym. And it was one of those areas that I was like, what are you guys doing? Because before I started, it was probably 12 years ago now. So 2010, 2011, I had been working for about 10 years in very general strength and conditioning, working with a lot of basketball players, soccer players, but I had access that just kind of broadened out as I got out of the university programming. And I started to really gain a passion as I got a little bit older for endurance sports and the importance, not only in competition and in professional level, but also from a well-being and health perspective for most of the rest of us who are going through this journey of life. And I envision the endurance athletes as setting an example and being our kind of North Star of performance, and watching Ironman, watching marathon championships, watching, even rowing, mountain biking, cycling, the Tour de France. You just watch these endurance sports that are just prolific. And then to see those actual athletes in the gym that I was working in, was really inspirational. But then to see what they did in the strength training area was incredibly lacking from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You would have some of the best marathon runners in the world. Former gold medal winner Frank Shorter is a very good friend of mine, the last American man to win a gold medal in the marathon. He won a silver medal in Montreal. But to see what he did in the strength training area was virtually nothing. And he is an older athlete, so to watch how his body progressed through time as a marathoner, I was like, if this guy would just lift some weights, and if we could put more muscle on him, I don't think it would impair his ability to run well. But unfortunately, in his era of running, he truly, he thought it would. And he was very, very resistant to strength work or anything above a 10-pound dumbbell. So
Mm-hmm.
Frank, although he's a very, very good friend, was incredibly resistant. And I think it's an indication of the era of running and the fear of putting on muscle and having to carry that muscle through sport. The second big influence that I got to see in the weight room was Dave Scott. And so Dave is, I believe, a 6-time Ironman champion. Dave did come into the strength training area and lift weights. Dave uh, was a great leader. Just watching him quietly do his work in the weight room, he didn't make a big deal about it. He just got it done. And I was like, this man is doing something that other people aren't doing, and I appreciated it. And I had the chance to become his friend, and we talked a lot about it. And I think he was really on the right path, and it shows through his story, through his profession, through he's one of the greatest of all time in Ironman sport. And then the next era is kind of where I started to have some impact, and people began to trust me. And so my first endurance athlete to really trust me and understand what I was trying to accomplish and my viewpoint was Timothy O'Donnell. And Tim is currently the fastest American man in Kona. He was second to Jan Frodeno in 2019. And I've been working with Tim and his wife, Marinda Carfrae, 3-time Kona champion, for over 10 years now. So we have had a very, very good run. We've set a very good example, and developed my philosophy working with them and for them. We become like family, and I think the rest is kind of history for people to kind of follow. So those are my those are my anchors of how I got started, and then it just kind of has beautifully snowballed from there. And I've had the opportunity to work with some of the best athletes in the world.
You mentioned that Boulder is a mecca for endurance sports. In a sense, like, why is that so? Is it because of the infrastructure of places like yours, or the talents and the coaches? Like, why is that?
I think the most important thing about Boulder, Frank Shorter was one of the first people to come here in the early 70s. And it might have even been late 60s, but I think it was early 70s. And the thing is the proximity to the mountains, because you could get even higher. Our altitude is a mile high of altitude. So we're at 5,200 square feet, 5,200 feet of elevation. You can translate that to meters in a probably more efficient way than I can, but it was very attractive. They started figuring out and thinking, if I train at altitude, I can get an advantage. I can increase blood volume. I can increase the way that I perform at sea level if I spend more time at altitude. And it's a beautiful place to live. There's a valley right below the Rocky Mountains. So you can get even higher. We have some very famous runs just out of Boulder, 15 minutes out of Boulder, and you're 3,000 feet higher, that are just beautiful. And so I think spending time at altitude is no secret. It's an advantage in endurance sports. And then just the amenities of the University of Colorado being here, great restaurants, great training facilities, really beautiful trail systems. It just really led itself to be a very popular place for athletes to come.
Sense. And with that, I mean, you also said something about your philosophy of training. I know you have your own approach, but could you expand on your, like, what is your training philosophy and how, and like, that's one thing, but how it's evolved over time? Because I know you've been doing that for a while now.
I think what we have to look at with any kind of training or any kind um, of any philosophy of being good at something, and developing wisdom and hopefully mastery, but you never stop learning. And so number one is I surrounded myself with the smartest people that I could possibly seek out and wanted to become their friends, and figuring that this was far long before social media was around, and even before email. I mean, it blows my mind that we didn't even have the internet. So I would go to places to learn from some of the best coaches that I could identify. And so there's a sliding scale, and let's begin at one end. We'll call it the left end. We'll call that a very traditional approach to strength. And then all the way at the other end, we'll call it a very non-traditional approach to strength. And I think anybody that's interested in strength training will recognize that you can never get away from the traditional strength that has been proven to build resiliency and robustness within athletes. And so that would be your very traditional deadlifting and squatting and bench pressing and rowing. Those are for very traditional exercises. And for many of my athletes, those form the foundation of what we do. And we do a lot of it, and we do it in a very organized, periodized way. So they're not always lifting the same amount of weights. But then as we grew and we started as a group of coaches around the world, we started recognizing that that probably isn't enough. There's things happening in performance that are causing worry or deficit, or we're not preventing enough injuries, or we need to do better. And so we started looking much beyond muscle, and we started to look at the structure of the body and the position of the joints. And then we started looking at the fascial system and the nervous system, and how the nervous system in the brain truly does control our access to our strength. So just because you're a strong athlete doesn't mean you're going to be a fast athlete. Just because you're a strong athlete doesn't mean you're going to win the Tour de France. There's not a direct correlation to how much weight we can lift based on our overall performances. Quite frankly, some of the best athletes in the world don't lift weights in a traditional sense. And so keep thinking about that sliding scale that we're talking about. And when you meet an athlete who is very, very accomplished, but has not lifted any traditional strength training, then imposing that on their body would be a mistake. So you kind of have to start backwards through non-traditional venues. And so I really look at the whole athlete. What do they need? Where are they lacking? And how can I be of assistance? And a lot of times that means starting from the non-traditional and starting to work on movement, starting to just give them more space in their body, opening the body up, decompressing the body through breath work. So some of my most recent work that I've been working with people has been actually understanding the expansion of the rib cage and the decompression of the spine, and how that leads to better movement in the lower body, or that moves through, that helps with core strength and more core mobility. So we talk more about core control than we do about core strength, because there's a lot of athletes that are chasing core strength, but they're actually ending up with rigidity that can actually impair performance. And so movement as a science is still ever evolving, and anyone that tells you they understand the nervous system and the fascial system and there's nothing else to learn, run away, because they're just wrong. We are learning every single day, that there is just going to be more and more that we will learn. I mean, the records are falling. We're about to go into this. We're here in the summer of 2023. We're going to see so many world records in Budapest in the world championships in track and field. And that's going to come because as strength coaches and coaches are learning more about the rest, recovery, and
Mhm.
training ratios, and we're also learning how movement training can benefit some athletes, and strength training traditionally can benefit some athletes. So my philosophy is very open-minded and specific to the athlete, but my understanding hopefully is as big as it can be right now, and I will continue to learn and dig in and surround myself with smart people so I can learn even more.
At the beginning, you also said you were I mean, you were an athlete for a while actually, and how have your personal athletic experiences influenced your approach as a coach, or maybe they haven't at all?
Oh no, they definitely did for me. I was identified as a very young, highly skilled basketball player. I'm a very good shooter. I'm a scorer, two guard. The biggest problem for me in international competition was I was very skinny and probably not strong enough to compete on an international level. So the strength training athletically took me very quickly to that next level from a very good skinny kid into a much more dominant, robust athlete who could take a hit, deliver a hit, continue to do all the high skill sports, and being able to identify and really be conscious of what a specific athlete perhaps needs on that spectrum of traditional to non-traditional. I work with some really really talented athletes, so imposing a cookie cutter approach to athletes would be a big mistake on my part. So knowing and expanding and and even just hypothesizing athletes that I don't work with, what would I do to help them? I do that all the time. Like I can't stop doing that. It's so actually annoying.
But when I was looking, I mean, doing the research, I saw that your students are, but correct me if I'm wrong, but your students are mostly women, multiple champions, record holders, etc. But if that's true, so what key differences would you point out between coaching men and women in endurance sports? Because that's probably one of the sports where it matters a lot in a sense.
You know, yeah, the guys are interesting. So my current male athletes would be Timothy O'Donnell and Rudy von Berg. Rudy just had a very dominating experience at Ironman Texas. He just recently was hit by a car and broke his collarbone, but he is recovering very quickly, I believe, from that surgery. I believe his commitment to strength training on a very consistent basis has led to his quicker recovery, and he will toe the line September 10th in Nice. I believe, I would hope, as a favorite and do very very well in a world champion, the first world championship out of Kona. The men tend to not recognize the importance of strength training to the same extent that the women. And the men's field is also very very deep. It's highly competitive and it's moving very, very quickly. The introduction of the Norwegian athletes has really set, I see it every single day here in Boulder. I hear it in conversations at parties. Many of the top men in the world are friends of mine. I listen to them and I see them chasing um, sodium bicarbonate. They're everybody's testing lactate. They're very distracted by the Norwegian success. I
Hmm.
know because Rudy's coach is Gustav's brother, Mikal. Um, honest answer, McCall could care less if Rudy does strength. They believe deeply, deeply in their training protocols. Rudy does strength because he recognizes that he feels better in his training when he does it. The work that we do together helps set him up to do the work. The work comes easier for him. With the women, so between Taylor Knibb, Emma Pallant-Brown, Paula Finley, I know I'm forgetting some, but I've done a little bit of work with Holly Lawrence this year. The women are a little bit more patient. The field is also a little bit thinner, but we can also look. I mean, we have to learn from Lucy Charles. Lucy's one of the greatest Ironman and cross uh, distance athletes in the world as well, and she's come back from that stress fracture uh, working with some of the best strength coaches in the world, and they think out of the box. It's clear because she shared her journey from the Red Bull people, and they have some. I that would be an amazing experience for me to be able to go to the Red Bull facility and work alongside or learn from and spend time with some of the best, greatest minds in high performance. And she was so generous to share her story. So I watch a lot of those things that Lucy's doing to come back from her injury. Most of my athletes have watched that as well, and they're like, "Damn, Erin, that's what we do," you know. So I like to think I'm on the right path with these athletes. We're competitive with Lucy. In some cases, we've beat her. I think Taylor Knibb is probably going to change women's triathlon for sure, and they're going to recognize they need to be stronger to be able to compete with Paula on the bike and Taylor on the bike, and you know they're swimming with Lucy now, and Lucy's getting stronger on the bike and stronger on the run, and with Annie Haug, and I mean it's I love the women's sport for sure. I love the men's sport as well, but the men's sport right now we have to acknowledge is very very different than the ladies because of the Norwegian men. So
Okay.
I think that
But
it's
what's
amazing.
what's with them? I mean, like what's your opinion on that? Why, like, what's their secret?
I think the secret is the longevity of the commitment to the program. I really think consistency in any sport is magic. I think switching things up in 2 months or 2 years is too quick. I think the fact that the boys have been together since before they were men, like they prepubescent, they were training together on the junior program, and they have each other, which I think is powerful. I also think that they have a deep belief system in what they're doing, and they're committed to it. And because they have so much data accumulation over the years, any small adjustment is a big adjustment that could lead to just the continuation of dominance. I mean, they are dominant, and an athlete might come in and compete with them from time to time, but it's the commitment to the process and the leadership that they have, and that you know a lot of the other men are like, well, I got to change coaches. I mean, especially in the US, it's very, you can see it. The European athletes seem to stick with their coaches a little bit longer. The American athletes are uh, they're a little bit searching. You know, To is probably the exception, and he if he was 5 or 6 years younger, I think Tim would be a very very competitive and be able to make some small adjustments with his coach Julie Dibbins. Julie's an exceptional coach over the years and proven so, and Tim is a very collaborative athlete. Um, but it'll be very interesting. I mean, we've seen Lionel Sanders just very publicly make changes. We've seen Sam Long very publicly make changes, and Lionel's Canadian, I'm Canadian, so I kind of lump the Americans and Canadians into the North American package. But you know, look at them searching, and those are the best North American athletes, and and they're bouncing. They're both self coached right now, and you know, I'm a coach. I think that's insane.
Because you said a few times about the athletes that you trained that had some injuries and they had some accidents, some more severe ones, some less. But still, how do you approach working with an athlete who's like dealing with a major injury or like a setback like that?
I will never, ever, ever quit on an athlete. You know, my athletes that have experienced discomfort. I mean, all of them have. If you're an endurance athlete competing at the elite level, you're going to have some niggles, and hopefully we catch those early and they don't turn into more. You know, we've just come through with Taylor. I've been training and working with Taylor Knibb since she was 18 years old. She's now 25, and she's amazing. But we've been through some injuries. They've been very public. They're on her YouTube channel, so I'm not speaking out of school. But at the same time, there's a human being inside of that athlete, and we it's an opportunity as a coach to get to know that athlete even better as a person. It also is a chance to expand your network of doctors and physical therapists and practitioners that are willing to take on a world class athlete, and we have an amazing team here in Boulder now that we've put together because of working with Taylor. She's amazing, and clearly just had a very very difficult stress fracture in her foot in a very low blood flow area. It did not heal well. She was still able to get herself on a world podium for WTCS. She's the reigning 70.3 world champion and a dominant win in St. George, Utah. We're going to see some really great things from Taylor now that she's fully recovered and training well. But going through that process with her was and that was probably the most personal process that I've been through with an athlete because we live in the same town. We see each other very frequently. So that was interesting. But at the same time, Marinda Carfrey, I worked with Rinny for 10 years, over 10 years. And the only thing we had to deal with really with Rinny was pregnancies. And that was exciting and fun. But keeping athletes healthy is always the goal and finding that balance. But they will walk the line that puts them in harm's way a little bit. So I just think always acknowledging that your athlete is much more than an athlete and a high performance person. They're a person. And they have feelings and they have insecurities and they have yes, they come across as quite confident, but we're all just people doing the best we can. So I think working with athletes with as people, they get very scared and having a team that supports you as a human being is it's a very big source of pride for me to be a good leader for those aspects and when bad stuff happens.
Okay, and you covered most of, I mean, you covered some of that to some extent, but what are the most common misconceptions, or maybe let's call them mistakes, that you see endurance athletes make, but regarding strength training in particular?
I think there's a few exercises that are very compressive to the spine. I think we could take the squat. I have a very hard line. Well, it's pretty hard. There are very, very few athletes that I will put a bar on their back, a heavy bar on their spine. Whether it's cycling or triathlon, um, the curvature of the spine is typically in a little bit of a kyphotic position. So it's a little bit short on the front side of the body and a little bit rounded on the back side of the body. That position is not conducive to holding heavy load on the back. And back squatting has been shown here in the US. They've done a lot of studies with NFL football players. There was a period of time, and I think it still is probably of great concern, that back squatting was actually injuring more athletes than the actual sport. So they were getting injured in the weight room. And I think that's when I started really taking a much more conservative approach and not thinking and shifting my thought process a little bit that lower body strength wasn't everything. You could build a tremendous amount of strength with a weight vest hiking up a mountain rather than in the weight room doing deadlifting and squatting. You could have a terrific sports coach prescribing exceptional workouts on sessions on the bicycle and chasing wattage in a really organized way that would create incredible strength and speed on the bike. And that I could actually cause a problem for that progression in the weight room if I ask too much of lower body lifting. And so I think that I'm very risk averse. I don't back squat my athletes. I front squat athletes. I goblet squat athletes. I overhead squat athletes. We split squat athletes, but very rarely will I put the bar on the back of an athlete. So I've been very cognizant and respectful of the training process of endurance athletes, that it is very hard to be an endurance athlete. The fatigue load that they carry is very high, and that subjects them to even more risk for injury in the weight room or even in training. And so to contribute to that fatigue profile by over prescribing strength work is probably just as big a problem as under prescribing. So having the ability during the pandemic to start to use eyes on Zoom sessions, or just like I'm able to see you as we chat right now. I mean, this was much more difficult 4 or 5 years ago. And so through using technology, whether I can have athletes now in Switzerland and have my eyes on her as we train, or I can see an athlete in Sweden, or I can see an athlete in Bend, Oregon, or Tucson, And that has expanded the ability to actually have eyes on and recognize movement or postural dysfunction, and then figure out how to use a strength strategy or a mobility strategy, or I'll say stretching, although I'm not a big stretching advocate, um, to open the body up and give the body space and prepare it to undergo some strength work, and it might be very little. So I think the risk is in the fatigue that the athletes carry, and then the other risk is getting in the way of the strength of the sport coach. The greatest compliment that I have is to work alongside of a sport coach that trusts me, that I'm not going to get in the way of the progress of the athlete.
You mentioned technology as well, but so I'll get into that field a little bit. I know you founded also the ECFIT Boulder app.
Yep.
Um, could you tell us where did the idea or maybe the inspiration for that come from?
When it is, course, it's very technology evolutionary, and the access and opportunities. I work very closely with a company called Technogym. They're the number one equipment provider in the world. Here in the US, it's actually interesting. In Europe and Asia, Technogym is number one. They sponsor the Olympic Games. Everybody knows who they are. In the United States, they're very expensive. They're known as a very expensive equipment provider, and competition in the US lays it so that Technogym fights very hard for its market position in the United States and Canada. But I have always been a Technogym customer in owning my club. I recognize the excellence in technology that they provide, and the friendships and the consulting services that I've provided through for Technogym have led me to meet some really cool people. And so when I started to become a little bit more publicly known through my work, specifically with Tim O'Donnell and Marinda Carfrae, people from around the world started emailing me to find out what we were doing. And I was finding myself, because I can't help myself. I want to help people as much as I possibly can. So I was sitting at the computer writing programs, and then the names of to produce nomenclature for some of these movements that we do, and they're not Cirque du Soleil type movements. They're very, very specific, single arm, single leg, slight internal rotation of the hip. Like, you're having to write such long descriptions for these exercises, and I was doing it for hours a day to give somebody a program, give them. I wasn't even selling it, in Europe, because they wanted to know what we're doing. And one of my friends from Technogym said, "You know what? I have the ability to help you create an app where you could just videotape the exercises, and then just you can put your names in there, but they'll look at the video, and then it crosses all the languages." And so my friends at Technogym helped me create the app, and then they didn't really want to align with me. They wanted to do their own thing. So we use the same kind of app, and it has since really evolved. And as a matter of fact, timing wise, here in the summer of 23, that app has been around for, I believe, about 9 or 10 years. Just now with them, I am switching to a new tech platform that I think is a little bit cleaner, a little bit better.
Mhm.
It's also it's something I'm just launching here, seriously, in the next month. So I've had to do a lot of clicking and posting and pictures and everything to launch a new app to replace the ECFIT Boulder app, and it'll be the Pro ECFIT programs. So similar. What's really, I think, unique about it is most of the demonstrations of all the exercises in the videos are done by professional elite athletes. And there's a tremendous amount of Paula Finley. She was my first athlete that I videoed, and then secondly was Rinny, and then third was To. It's interesting. I didn't choose Tim, and we've talked a lot about the men and women. Um, the girls look better doing the exercises, I gotta tell you. So from a demonstration standpoint, Tim grew up as a swimmer, so it took me almost a year to do a lot of really great single leg exercises with Tim. He was very much 2 feet on the ground for quite a long time. He's very, very good now, and become very, very good at things. But the girls in general tend to pick up a lot of the exercises a little bit faster. So they provide most of the demonstrations of the exercises. So it's expanded my reach and my opportunity to provide my leadership to people all over the world. And it's been really a fun process.
But is that kind of training that's online, is that, let's say, is it less effective, or you can consider that, or it's the same? Because probably people challenge you in that way, and they say,
Yeah.
okay, but it's obviously it's better to meet up in person and then do the training. And what's your take on that?
It's about an 80-20 mix. You know, we are human beings. We have two legs, two arms, and most of us like to do the same things. Like I have definitely created a community around swim, bike, run, and cycling, and hiking, and a little bit of skiing. So the biggest thing is 80% of the training should be a very traditional training, and 20%, and sometimes even less, should be very specific to exactly what that athlete needs. And through Zoom sessions and through custom training, I'm able to recognize that if I can work with somebody for 4 or 5 hours, 4 or 5 sessions, I can we collaborate. The athlete collaborates with me, and we've come up with that additional 20% of their program that's very personal to solving their specific problems, because we all have different stories in our life of why, if you are a cricket player and you've thrown the cricket, or the ball, a lot, you're going to be shorter on that right shoulder. And you might even have some shoulder injuries that have caused some hip problems, because shoulders, anything that happens with a shoulder typically will affect the hip. And we don't really think like that. I do, though. I think about the whole body and the wrapping of the fascial system within the body. So I think we can get most of the way there with most athletes, with a very general program. And then 20%, we want to customize that program for the athlete. So I usually will try to see an athlete that wants to do a custom program about 5 separate hours, of observation and movement. And then I want them to go train and see how their body comes back after hard training. And then we will make adjustments and we'll create that specific custom side of the program. The the interesting thing is many people want a custom program, but after 30 days of a very traditional program, they feel good. They recognize that they feel better. The things that I want them to look for is that their tempo and their threshold wattage on the bicycle, if they're a triathlete or a cyclist, we want to look at those harder efforts, not the hardest efforts, because that's very adrenaline focused. But we want those sustained, longer efforts to begin to feel easier, quicker. So if we talk to a cycling coach, they want most, like in a half Ironman situation, most age group athletes will be around threshold or a little under threshold for the entire 56 miles, or how many Ks, um, 90K. Um, and that wattage should begin to feel easier, faster than if they were just cycling training. So you should see a decrease in heart rate at the same wattage. You should listen to the athlete says, I nailed that session today. There's a positivity in the mind that comes with just really nailing a 20-minute interval. And I'm an athlete. I am an endurance athlete. I've been to world championships a couple of times. I know what that feels like when you hit a 20-minute threshold and you're like, damn, that is my wattage meter off. Just even going to Jonas Vingegaard's time trial. The first thing he said was he thought his power meter was broken while he did that time trial. And I was like, I love that. Like, for many reasons that happened for him on that day, but I love hearing that kind of story. So educating athletes as to how do you know if it's working? Well, if those kind of 20-minute efforts are coming easier and you're in conjunction with a mobility and strength program that's kind of a general program, but that's already happening, we know we're on a really good path. And I might even put people off to take on a custom program for a while. Let's just stick with the general program and keep getting to that endpoint where, okay, now my FTP has gone up 10 or 15 watts. Now I think I need the custom program. And I would agree with that. Now we're at the pointy end of the spear, and now it's time to get a little bit more selective on what we're doing. And so there's a timing to that with a lot of athletes or elite age groupers. That it can be a little intimidating as a coach to work with some of the world's best athletes. You don't want to screw it up.
But do you also add data analysis software to your training, to your coaching, let's say to your coaches, or even do you use it, or maybe you advise it? Well, if you work, like when you work with athletes, do you work with that as well, or you're very traditional in a sense, you don't want to use that too much of it?
I can't use too much of it, and I say it that way because my need as a coach for progression has to come second to the sport coach. The progression in the weight room is not important unless the athlete is progressing as in their wins. Or that's why I really love the PTO rankings. Sometimes we don't see, and Thorsten does such an amazing job with figuring out how are we going to rank an athlete in a race in Oregon. They're not against Anyhow. Like, how are we going to know if they're in the ballpark? Well, he has come up with a really good, what do you call it? An algorithm of competition. And so, the most exciting athletes for me, I mean, I think I have 3 women in the top 10 in the world. We want to keep them in the top 10, or I have 4 maybe. We want to keep them in the top 10, but having that athlete ascend will be very difficult. But it can be done, and we want it to happen. We want Taylor to be number 1 in the world. We want Holly to be inside the top 3, and we want Paula to continue. I want all of my athletes to continue to ascend, but probably the most exciting athletes are the number 55 and 56, and they're just starting to come up into, the first meeting I had with Imogene Simmons was, okay, what's your ranking right now? And it was like 72. Well, now she's 55, and I think pretty soon she's going to be 42, and then she'll be in the top 30, and she'll get all these opportunities, and we'll be like, is it working? It's working because the rankings are changing. You're racing well. So what do we need to change? And it's the same thing with the boys. When the boys, if you're going down in the rankings, a lot of the athletes that I used to work with, and not going to name names, but they've jumped ship, and they feel like they need heavier weights and they need harder training. If I'm going to part ways with an athlete, it's usually because they want me to train them harder. And that is not, unless I think that's what they need, I'm not going to go along with that. And I watched their rankings, and it's pretty clear you were 20 spots higher when we were doing the work we were doing and going the right direction, but maybe not fast enough for you. But endurance sports, it's a journey much more than it might not happen this year. It might happen next year. And that kind of leads us back to that conversation about the Norwegians, the commitment to the process, and seeing that moving up the rankings 2 places or 3 places is incredibly good. And it's way better than going down 2 places or down 4 places or going the wrong direction. So I think the rankings have really given us as coaches a measurement tool that is probably more important than how much weight you're lifting in the weight room.
Mhm.
Your performance is everything to me, and that relationship with the sport coach and how we can collaborate and work together for the betterment of the athlete.
I found one quote from you, and you said, there are somewhat predictable patterns that arise in endurance sports due to repetitive motion. In short,
Yep.
it doesn't surprise me when I find mobility in areas that should be stable and stability in areas that should be mobile. Could you elaborate on this issue as well?
Yes, you're just describing what I do most of my day. So I think I will give credit where credit is due. Gray Cook is a physical therapist here in the United States. One of my mentors. He probably doesn't even know he's one of my mentors, but if Gray Cook is speaking, I am listening. And many of us who are leaders in strength and conditioning utilize this protocol. And it's very, very easy to remember for the listeners. If you think of the plantar fascia, the bottom of the foot should be stable. The ankle should be mobile. The knee should be stable. The hips should be mobile. The lumbar spine, the low back, should be stable. The thoracic spine should be mobile, and the cervical spine should be stable. So the
Mhm.
body stacks in that way. And if all you have to remember is the bottom of the foot, then the rest of it just stacks joint by joint. So if you
Mm-hmm.
come in and an athlete cannot move or they're not moving well through their feet, and every single coach will have a different way that they like to look at ankle mobility. I definitely have my way of looking at ankle mobility. I also have my way of looking at hip mobility and thoracic spine mobility. I have a greater opportunity as a coach to impact mobility than I do stability. But if I can get the ankles, the hips, and the thoracic spine moving better than when the athlete walked in, it's amazing how brilliant the body is and the brain is. If those three areas are moving well, the other areas fall into step and become they do their job of stability. So the
Mm-hmm.
knee, the low back, and the neck can rotate. They just are not really built to do it a lot. And so this is where we start to create compensation patterns in sport, in all sports. And so I remember as a basketball player, we were taping my ankles all the time, and I intuitively knew I didn't want my ankles taped. I didn't even want to wear high top basketball shoes. I wanted to wear low top basketball shoes and no tape on my ankles. It wasn't an option for me because they
Mm-hmm.
felt like they were protecting us. But what they were actually doing was shutting down the ankle movement. And then the knee started doing more crazy rotational activities because the ankle wasn't the shock absorber that it was before we put tape on it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we created this a little bit more of a problem. I'm not going to say it led to more ACL injuries in female athletes, but we could hypothesize that it might in some, So I wish I had known then what I knew now, about movement and speed of movement and reaction time and how to cut off the baseline a little bit faster because I'm 6 feet tall and I'm a two guard. So I'm guarding somebody who's usually 5'4" to 5'7".
Mm-hmm.
I could have been a much better defender, and that would have helped me a lot. So understanding how the body is really designed to move and move well. Cycling shuts down the motion in the thoracic spine. It just does, especially if you're in the TT position. It also shortens the front side of the body, which impair the expansion of the rib cage and the ability to breathe well. And that's where I've really started digging into the breath work and understanding how that um, uh, training the muscles of respiration, which is not a very sexy thing to do, but it can enhance a lot of high performance athletes. It can be that little bit of percentage that some athletes, like, they want to go ride in the mountains harder at doing VO2 max efforts. And I'm like, no, no, just lay here and breathe deep. It's going to be amazing. Like, it's way better for you. So I get a little bit of pushback from some people, and some other people are like, really, you think that'll work? And I'm like, yeah, that might be a better way to spend our time today. So it's, what do we want to do? Yeah.
What would be the advice that you would have for amateur athletes, but the ones who want to incorporate the strength training into their regimen, but they can't reach out to you directly, but because they're working, I don't know, for example, in Europe. So what would be your recommendation?
Start small. Add just a few things. Focus on posture. If you're standing tall and your shoulders are back and your thumbs are forward, one of my favorite first I again, there's two key things and that I look at when I look at somebody when I first meet them, even if they're not an athlete, I just am like, how does this person stand? If when you look at somebody and you can see the backs of their hands, it will tell you that their shoulders are internally rotated and there's a huge opportunity to strengthen their upper back and help their posture. If you can help their posture, they will immediately perform better. The other thing that we look at is the position of the feet. If they stand like a duck with the feet facing out a little bit, we know that there's a tremendous opportunity to find balance in the hips and be able to move through hip motion with more ease and get greater glute activation as well. So if you're standing like a duck, you are underutilizing your glute muscles, your butt muscles, and in endurance sports in general, but in all sports, I having more glute activation and function and strength is a very big advantage. So I think starting small and focusing on posture and position would be a very, very good thing, and be very wary of lifting a lot of heavy weights in the first 2 or 3 months of training. This needs to be a sustainable and accessible process. And if
Hmm.
you get too much too soon, you might get a little bit of positive feedback in your running or riding, but it won't be sustainable. And you want to just be patient and accept that in longevity, someday you will turn 40, and someday you will turn 50, and someday you will turn 60. And you don't want to compromise your skeletal or your joint health early in your career, such that it might negatively impact you later in life. You know, the most joyful athletes that I know, besides my world champions, are the older athletes who are like, I feel amazing and I'm 55 or I'm 65 or I'm 75. And so in my eyes, I'm always looking, you know, Taylor might be 25, but I'm already thinking about what's she going to be like at 35? And will we be able to sustain that if she wants into her mid 40s? You know, and that seems to be world
Hmm.
class. You know, that's where the shift comes. You become more of a legend and less of a champion. But you know that should be 100% up to the athlete. So the work that we're doing now in their 20s or 30s, we want that to sustain them in a very, very healthy way throughout their entire life. And
Hmm.
that's when I get an age grouper, it's super fun because their goals are different. You know, they definitely, most of my people that are attracted to me as a coach, they want to do well. They want to win or they want to move up the rankings. I mean, we even have age group world rankings. So, you know, there's people that just want to do better than they did last year. And I believe that as we age, we can do better than we did last year if we do it well. So I'm a little conservative. I'm very risk averse, and but I take a long term approach, and I think that's played well for me and my team for sure.
What are the specifics in building processes of such business as, Rally Sports Health and Fitness Club? Could you share some also on that? Is it because probably that's a very competitive market?
Well, it's a very competitive market, and this will lead me. I don't know if you know this because I've just been sitting with it for so long. In 2018, I first of all, Rally Sport is a 40,000 square foot facility. It has been around for more than 40 years. I have worked there for 32 years. I have owned the facility and the business for 12 years. In 2018, we recognized that our building was really falling apart. We also recognized the need to have a bigger pool and expand our offerings as a world class training facility. And we made the decision in 2018 and into 19 to sell the land and the building,
Okay.
with the understanding that we were going to build a smaller high performance building and a bigger pool and a bigger aquatics facility. And then the pandemic hit.
Okay. And then
so
you needed to
so
change your plans.
yeah, we pivoted hard because I believe this has already it's starting to happen now in the big club business. And keeping in mind, I'm in an 80-20 business as a health club. 80% of my members are not competitive professional athletes. I am not the Red Bull training facility, although I would have loved to have been, and that's kind of where we were going.
Hmm.
Um, so 80%, 20% being high performance athletes is not enough to sustain a business.
Right.
So through the pandemic, uh, we downsized tremendously. Boulder is a very affluent community. Most people of the 80% started to put in home gyms, access to the internet. It was just a proliferation of offerings of strength and conditioning. Peloton is huge. Access to coaches like me. I do a lot of online training that I never did before during the
Mhm.
pandemic. People were just like, hey, I can do this at home. And I felt like after the pandemic had diminished a little bit, because I don't think it's over, but we're just handling it in a different way now. I thought all my remote clients would go back to their gyms. Well, they haven't. And people haven't gone back to traditional gyms if they have solved that. So, long story short, we sold the land, we sold the building, we kept the business, and we are not going to rebuild a new facility. That I wouldn't put my own money into a facility in Boulder. It's very difficult to get buildings done in Boulder. It's very expensive to do buildings in Boulder. I have the investments, the person to pay for it, but I just don't think it's the right business decision. So we
Hmm.
are expanding our coaching services. I'm adding strength coaches from around the world to ECFIT coaching,
Good.
people with like-mindedness, and we're just going to take it a little bit leaner and meaner. I'm
On the
managing
other,
someone else's facility, but that window
yeah,
exists in Boulder for someone, but not going to be me.
but on the other hand, I mean, the pandemic made a lot of things harder, but on the other hand, it actually helped with the app and with the online trainings because it became very popular to train online. I even
Yeah.
had those some session like that. So yeah. So but I get it. Like the model
Yeah.
changed, you pivoted, you needed to adjust to the market.
I miss having a facility. I miss the camaraderie of the athletes together. I think that right now in Boulder, Ashley Gentle is here. We're just 2 weeks out from the PTO U.S. Open, and so many of the athletes are here in Boulder training, and they meet up at the pool over at Scott Carpenter Pool, kind of randomly, or then now they're starting to make plans. But that all happened at my club before, and it was so fun and nice to see them all just being friends and helping each other get better. And it's just been really a privilege over the years to watch. Craig Alexander would come into Boulder for the summer, and he would join Rally Sport. His children would train there, and his wife would train there, and just to be part of the mix and get to know such extraordinary people has been a really, really highlight of my life. So I miss it, but I know we're going a good direction, and yeah, we'll keep it going that way.
What are the future goals and aspirations as a coach and yours as a coach and also as an athlete? What's your plan for the? It's kind of connected with what you said, but probably.
Yeah,
But what's a big dream in
I
5 years?
I think I think the biggest dream is to continue. I mean, I've had extraordinary success. I've been part of world-class podiums and consistently world-class podiums. So I'm very confident in the training methodology and the acceptance and the trust of the athletes and the coaches that I get to work with. And I want that to continue. It's a really it's just a privilege, and I treat it as such. So I want that to continue, and I hope that continues. But I also am finding, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier as a coach, that helping, and I'll put air quotes around it, normal people age in a really, really cool way and continue to enjoy sport at a high level. I'm an older athlete now, I'm in my 50s. I recognize the importance of competition and the role that it plays in my life. And it's not just a measurement of beating people anymore, it's a measurement of honoring and optimizing my genetic gifts as an athlete, but the incredible joy that I get as an athlete through sport. And I've become a competitive golfer. I love golf, but I
Oh,
also am a cyclist, and I'm a triathlete. And I've come as high as sixth in my age group in the world in Malulaba. I thought I was in the top 10 in Nice, but I think I'm too big for that course. Me getting 142 pounds up those mountains was a little bit more, but I had probably one of my best world championships performances in Nice in 2019, and just an amazing experience. So having experience on that course and anticipation of the men this year is really, really a cool thing. But I want to stay in the top 10 in my age category. That's important to me, and I'm going to keep fighting for that. And that's a really fun fight. I don't think I'm the only one out there as an age grouper. So helping age groupers continue to enjoy sport, continue to enjoy competition, continue to stay healthy and feel good and wake up ready for the day. We just are learning so much about heart rate variability and sleep. That's a whole nother podcast, how that plays with tissue and mobility and movement, because we really don't have to degrade as human beings at the extent that and the pace that we think we do. We can really put off some of those years of pain and lack of motion or lack of speed. We don't have to. It doesn't have to happen the way history has told us. So I'm excited to be at this part of history of optimizing strength work
That,
to optimize performance.
that's amazing. And I love what you said about being there for the athletes, not now when they're 25, but also when they're 35, 40, and just like maintaining this level. That I mean, I think that's is what sports is all about in a sense as well. But Erin, thank you very much for joining us today, and maybe we actually will do a volume two about the things you mentioned. So how,
More.
yeah, there probably we can talk for hours about what influences the performance. But thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope to get you. I know you're busy, but to get you sometime for this value too.
Well, thank you to everybody that takes time to listen to the podcast today, and thank you to you and to Anaki for connecting us.
Stay in touch with us, subscribe to our podcast, give us a like, comment, or share. If you want to reach out personally, you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram.